A good Thursday morning to all. Trust everyone is doing well today. It's another day that the Lord has made for rejoicing and being glad. In our family, we're happy. It's graduation day for my granddaughter, Kayla. This morning, I was reflecting upon the times that we are living in, and in particular, this renewed spotlight on matters of race in America and in the world. And while there are multiple perspectives that people lend to the situation, I want to say something to some of you out there who I believe need this type of help that I'm going to give you today. Let me just create a backdrop for what I'm going to say, and then I will get into the specifics of what I want to say. In Exodus chapter 3, when God called Moses to the deliverance ministry of the people of Israel, God's basis for deliverance was that he heard the cries of his people. And in hearing those cries, God planned their deliverance from Egyptian bondage. And I've always believed that there are times in which God is distinctly hearing the cries of a people. That is very unique when God hears the cries of a people and has a way of bringing to the fore issues that are a matter of those cries in the form of answered prayer. That's exactly what I believe is happening today on behalf of Black people around the world. Now, here's what I want to say. Some of you probably need to stop engaging people, or you need to save your energy from engaging persons who don't believe that racism in America against blacks is a reality. And probably even you need to stop engaging people who do not believe that it's a reality in the measures in which Black people assert that it is. And that is that there is racism in this nation and in the world against blacks that takes place on a daily basis. And that's based upon the community, the general populace of Black people around the world. That would be what Black people would say, that as a community of people, as a nationality of people, there's racism that we experience every day. You know, it takes a special heart like God to hear people crying for justice and for equality. And this is why in Exodus chapter 3, you know, God is at the pinnacle of all listening and understanding. And when people are not the objects of racism, one of the things that's missing in their experience is they don't realize the points of dishonor and the points of disrespect. Experientially, they don't know what it is to be despised, disdained, either directly or indirectly, wittingly or unwittingly, lightly or sometimes aggressively. They don't know what it is to experience that type of hostility and bias just based upon your skin color alone. And it takes a special heart, I call it God's heart, to hear that people are crying for equality and crying for justice. And it usually comes by divine revelation for people who don't experience it. It usually comes in the form of a George Floyd death. One time it was Bloody Sunday. Another time it was Emmett Till. Single incidents that bring out a global problem that's happening on a daily basis. And if you don't have that heart, or if you're engaging people who don't have that heart, you may be wasting your time. I call it the heart of God. Um, this is a season and this is an hour in which, and I'm going to probably say this in a manner in which may be misunderstood, but it needs to be said. It's not a time for conversation. It's actually a time for listening. For people who are not the objects of racism, this is not a time for conversing. This is not a time for dialoguing. It actually is a time of listening. Now, that's the God model of Exodus 3. Sometimes what happens is people are trying to find, how do we find the right argument to deal with race? And there are no arguments. In fact, when you find that there are arguments, usually those arguments are designed to disprove racism. This is where your science people come out, sociologists come out, historians come out. People start getting statistical data to try to prove that racism doesn't exist or that it's not that bad. Even some people find the right black person that says what they want to hear on racism not being as bad as it is, which if you understood anything about history going all the way back to slavery, there were even blacks who gave a different report on just how bad their conditions are. Usually those blacks that were endeared by their slave owners and treated differently than what's often differentiated in slavery, the house Negro, the house slave versus the field slave. Even in Martin Luther King Jr.'s day, not all blacks were on board with his civil rights movement approach. There were Republican blacks that opposed him. There were radical blacks that opposed him, like Malcolm X and Stokely Carmichael. But there were also some Republican blacks that felt that Martin was too radical, too loud, that his approach of protest, even nonviolent, that it was too forthright for the day. They felt that he needed to use another approach. I think it becomes senseless to try to engage people who don't have a heart for other people's reality. And that is why I say I don't think it's about a conversation. I don't think it's about a dialogue. It's about persons who are ready now to come to the table and listen to the cries of people. There's too much narrative shaping when it comes to racism. There's too much proof finding as to how is it that we can make sure that this is not as real as the people who are crying say it is. And again, I'll say, then you have someone like the death of a George Floyd that comes. And that single incident, it actually becomes a mirror. I heard somebody say that the knee on the neck of the officer's knee, the white officer's knee on the neck of George Floyd, it probably is a single image, a single experiential image that reflects the whole system of racism that has been taking place since the days of colonialism, the North American slave trade, all the way up to the civil rights movements and to systemic racism that still exists today. I don't think everybody is ready for listening. I'll say it again, I'm not a person that believes that this is a time for conversation and dialogue. We've done that. Going all the way back to the days of slavery itself and the civil rights movement. It's a time for listening. And that's why I use Exodus chapter 3. God is a God who hears the cries. And if you can't hear the cries of a people, cry for justice, cries for equality, cries for, as Dr. Martin Luther King said, this document you wrote in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States, all we're asking you is to do what the document says. If you can't realize that people are not being treated according to the documents you've grafted, and I would even ask, the document of Scripture, which the second greatest command is that we would love our neighbors just like we love ourselves. For people who can't hear that, they're probably not worthy of being engaged, because only when there is a willingness to listen and not be paternalistic in that you feel you have to shape the narrative or help shape the narrative of Black people, what they need to hear, what they need to understand about themselves. That actually is very arrogant on the part of people who it's not their experience to be the objects of racism. And so for some of you, I see some people really strenuously trying to get people to see that this is a reality. And unless there is an ear like God, where you can hear the cries of people, people won't get it. Engage people who are listeners. Engage people who have come to learn. For us as Black people, we don't need to be educated or re-educated or updated, or we don't need statistical data thrown at us. I was watching a program with a white police chief trying to show statistically that police abuses against Blacks are not as bad as Blacks claim. And someone said to him, "Do you actually believe those statistics speaks for the day-to-day experience of what Black people are going through in the nations of the world?" I just want to say to those who you seem to be trying so hard to get people to see it and understand it, people either get it or they don't get it. And it's based upon where they are aligned with God. God was a God who could hear. And if you're talking when you should be listening, if you're processing when you should be listening, if you are narrative shaping while you should be listening, if you're trying to find just the right person that says what you believe about the subject instead of listening, then you're probably not ready to contribute to the reconciliation, the healing, and the understanding that is needed to be a part of this matter of racial injustice, specifically against Black people. And so I believe it's God who has allowed this subject to come to the fore. And in the same context of Exodus chapter 3, he's heard the cry of Black people, because they are the ones who are the objects of racism. And as we see played out on the world stage now, there are all kinds of measures being taken just to ensure that injustices against Black people are remedied. And you're either with God from a listening posture, or I believe you're either opposed to God from a listening posture. The days are over for just dialoguing and conversating. Maybe it's time for listening. And I said again, that may sound strange, but the heart of it comes from the fact of being like God. There's sometimes you need to stop talking, stop conversating, stop trying to tell people what's wrong in their assertion of there being injustices about there. And sometimes we just need to listen. And if there are people not listening, for those that I see strenuously, vehemently trying to get people to listen, listening is something that people either have or they don't have. And the beauty of Exodus chapter 3 is there's a God who knows when people are crying, and he listens. And that ought to be your model. God, not people, but God ought to be your model, that when there's time to listen, you listen, and therefore you hear.